Welcome to the season finale of For the Record. I'm your host, Loudmouth Luke, and for the final episode, at least for now, I wanted to do something extraordinary, if you will. Today, we're taking a look at my favorite album by my favorite band, Green Day's American Idiot. I feel like for the most part, this album needs no introduction since it's one of the most revered albums of all time. Plus, despite being my favorite album, I think it'd be interesting to look at some of the criticisms the record's gotten over the years. However, I think it would be best to get into a little detail about my overall experience with Green Day and how they became my favorite band, plus some brief history on the making of this album. When I was in high school, I first started getting into rock music, mainly from the stuff that was recommended to me by my friends and family, and a lot of stuff that I heard in passing. Around this time, my mom and my sister were into a lot of alternative rock and emo music, and Green Day was one of their favorites, so I'd heard a handful of their tracks in passing, and I do remember really liking those songs. I actually started getting into them around my sophomore year of high school, and I had listened to this album in particular around that time, and it genuinely changed my life. Some of the tracks on this album, which we'll get to later, challenged many of the beliefs I had at the time, and it made me fascinated with the band. Over the years, I listened to their whole discography, and through that, they became my favorite band. It's truly hard to explain what drew me to them, but their music was often energetic, fun, and in other cases truly captured the feelings of sadness and isolation. Their music always just really spoke to me. And in particular, I especially love the guitar riffs in their songs. They were so simple, but so powerful. Billy Joe is just such a great player despite being so simplistic, and in a lot of ways that inspired me to play guitar. So if it wasn't for Green Day, I probably wouldn't have started playing guitar and probably not even really gotten into music in the way that I have, which is why they'll always have a special place in my heart. I own all of their albums on CD, most of their albums on vinyl, and gotten as much Green Day merch as I possibly can. I've seen them in concert twice, and both shows I've been to are in my top 5 concerts. High school, in a lot of respects, was kind of rough on me mentally, and listening to Green Day made me feel heard, and in a lot of ways, listening to them were an outlet for me. Now, with this album in particular, there is a bit of lore surrounding its development. 4 years before American Idiot was released, Green Day released an album called Warning, which was a drastic change in their sound in comparison to the pop-punk style they were known for up to that point. It had a lot more of a stripped-back approach in the instrumentation and had a lot of folk influences. It was a huge commercial and critical flop, and so the band went back to the drawing board. Originally, the follow-up was going to be called Cigarettes and Valentines, which would have been in line with albums like Dookie or Insomniac, and maybe even Nimrod. However, during the recording process, all the master tapes were stolen. So they had two choices. They could either re-record everything from scratch or make something new altogether. And they chose the latter. But not only did they choose the latter, they went all out. Inspired by many things going on in the United States at the time, such as the Iraq War, and also inspired by other rock operas such as Tommy by The Who, Green Day decided to create a punk rock opera telling a story of rage and love. So without further ado, this is Green Day's magnum opus, American Idiot. The first track of the album is the title track, American Idiot, and it is one of the best album openers on any album in my opinion. It hits you in the face with this simple yet powerful guitar riff, and it sets the stage for what's to come. While it doesn't really play into the narrative of most of the album, it sets the groundwork for the story. It truly shows you what it was like to be an American in a post-9/11 world, and in a lot of respects the lyrics hold up even today. Media has a way of dividing us and driving people insane from paranoia, and this track emphasizes that feeling perfectly. It's also a great protest song with the themes of media control and propaganda, like previously stated, feel relevant even today. Despite being the opening track of the rock opera, this isn't the beginning of the story. It more or less lays the groundwork for the world of the characters, like previously mentioned. It was heavily inspired by the US in a post-9/11 world, and in that regards, it sets the stage perfectly. Not to mention, despite being under 3 minutes, this track hits you in the face in the best way imaginable, especially with that solo in the bridge near the end. It's not only one of my favorite Green Day songs, it's one of my favorite songs, period. And after this track, the story of American Idiot begins. Second track of the album, and the first track that starts the narrative, Jesus of Suburbia. This track is also a 5-part song, clocking in at almost 10 minutes, but despite that long runtime, it doesn't overstay its welcome at all. Ironically enough, it feels like half of the time every time I listen to it. The track introduces our first character of the album, Jesus of Suburbia, someone who is sick of his hometown, wanting something new, and as the 5 parts go on, he begins his journey out of his hometown. I love every 5 parts of this song. They feel so distinct from each other and progressively tell the story of Jesus of Suburbia and his quest. However, my personal favorite is the final part, Tales from Another Broken Home. It starts off with this awesome, punchy bass line from Mike Dirnt, and it has so much energy, and then as it progresses, it goes into like this halt, getting really quiet and somber before slowly building up and building up and building up before it hits you in the face one last time with this massive ball of energy, showing Jesus of Suburbia's last hurrah in his hometown. It's another personal favorite from the album, and it transitions into another fantastic track, Holiday. Like previously mentioned, Holiday is another phenomenal track, and in some respects, I feel like it has kind of a double meaning. One of my favorite things about this album is that most of the tracks tell a story, roughly about 80%, but despite the fact it's a concept album, a lot of these songs can stand alone and be interpreted however you want, and I think this song is a perfect example of this. Jesus of Suburbia in a new city, feeling the excitement of his new life and the dawning of the rest of his life, if you will. However, this track is also an anti-war song, with it being a response to the Iraq War that was happening at the time, which is further emphasized in the bridge of the track. I especially love the drum beat from Trey Cool in a way that's kind of this marching or running this feel, like the but it could be seen as a metaphor for the soldiers marching in Iraq. It's another amazing track, and it beautifully transitions into probably the biggest hit of the album, Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Like previously mentioned, this is more than likely the biggest hit from the album, and for good reason. Although I do think it's a little overplayed, I still think it's great. It's another track that for me can be enjoyed by itself, but also be enjoyed in the context of the album. In the context of the story, this album takes place right after Jesus of Suburbia entering this new town, which is later to be found as Jingletown, and he ends up feeling isolated and alone as he walks alone, realizing how isolating the big city can be when you don't have any friends or people to come home to. On its own, it's a great song that truly captures that feeling of being isolated and how somber and in some respects how aggravating it can be, which I think can be emphasized in a lot of the louder parts of the song, especially near the end. I think this track is a good time to bring up one of the biggest critiques that the album has, and that it's overproduced. Personally, I don't totally agree with this, but while listening to it through my computer headphone input, I did notice a couple instruments in the mix I don't normally hear when I'm listening to it in my car. I personally think that it really works here, with the part near the end acting as Jesus of Suburbia being driven to insanity from his isolation, which we'll come back to this critique in some respects later, but for me, the production on the album is great. It has this huge kind of like wall of sound feeling that makes it sound epic and makes a lot of the songs, and especially a lot of the more instrumentals, feel impactful. Either way, I think it's another great track that keeps the story going, and the next track is one of my least favorites. The next track is Are We the Waiting, and while it's one of the weaker tracks for me, I still really like it. It's just not one that I revisit often on its own. Before we actually get into the song itself, I have to mention something about this album that was on streaming platforms for a while that drove me nuts. For some reason, 60% of the songs were put together as one big song. For instance, Holiday was with Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and this track was with the next one. It drove me nuts because oftentimes I preferred one of the tracks over the other, so I would have to either play forward or skip one of the other tracks. It was annoying, and I mean, yes, in hindsight it was kind of an inconvenience, but again, why do that? It's so redundant because on the CD too, these songs were individual, so that's why I was kind of like, what? Regardless, when this album was re-released for its 20th anniversary, they did fix this, but man, it was annoying. Regardless, this track kind of continues the themes of the last track, where Jesus of Suburbia continues to feel isolated in the big city. He questions if leaving his hometown was all just a dumb fantasy, and he's waiting for something to actually happen. I especially like the drum beat from Trey Cool. It's a highlight of the track for me. It has this very calm but powerful feel to it, which drives the themes of the lyrics in the home more for me. While overall I think it's one of the weaker tracks, it's still incredibly solid, and it transitions into one of the best songs on the album, St. Jimmy. I love this song. I love everything about it. It's everything I love about this album and then some. It's loud, it's fast, it's in your face, and just, it's so awesome. This track introduces a new character, well, sort of. It really depends on your interpretation of the story. Most people seem to agree that it's Jesus of Suburbia's alter ego, who's the embodiment of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll mentality, St. Jimmy, which is further emphasized through the instrumentation. It's easily one of the most punky sounding songs, from the speed and just the overall energy the song has. It's one of my favorite songs on the album, and it's probably even in my top 5, or in some respects even top 3. So let's get to the next track. The next track is Me Novocaine, and it's one of the chiller songs from the album, but despite that, it's another personal fave. I know I keep saying that, but I just love every song of this album. It's so good. The somberness for me works in its favor, and that's mostly from the lyrical content. In the context of the story, Jesus of Suburbia is still feeling isolated and alone. However, here, he wants to numb the pain, which comes from the line, "Give me Novocaine," a drug that causes numbness. In addition to this, Jesus of Suburbia is either talking to St. Jimmy, or he's wanting to become St. Jimmy through drug use, like previously mentioned, as a way of coping with his mental issues. I love the instrumental of this track, especially from the solo before the final chorus. And despite that coming from an overdriven guitar, it has sort of this calm loudness to it that just makes it feel more impactful and really emphasizes the themes a lot more. It's another fantastic track that transitions into another great song, She's a Rebel. This is another fun, punky adjacent jam that continues the story. This track introduces the third character of the album, Whatsername. Through the lyrics, Jesus of Suburbia has sort of a love at first sight feeling from Whatsername. She's everything he is, wants to be, and finally makes him feel less alone in this big city. The instrumental of this track is great too. For me, despite what I said earlier, it doesn't feel like super punky, but it almost has kind of like a garage rock feel. And that's mainly from the rhythm, which is like, but regardless, it's another great track, so let's get to the next one. The next track is Extraordinary Girl, and while it's not one of my favorites from the album, it's still great, and in some respects, it's one of the most interesting tracks, mostly from an instrumental standpoint. It starts off with sort of this African drum beat, which I think is used to show how different and extraordinary, if you will, Whatsername is to Jesus of Suburbia, and by extension, St. Jimmy. The sense of awe Jesus of Suburbia has from the last track is carried over. However, St. Jimmy eventually gets with Whatsername, since that personality is the type of person Whatsername is attracted to. While Jesus of Suburbia is down on his luck and hopeless, which then easily goes into one of the top 3 best songs from this album. Letterbomb. It picks right up where Extraordinary Girl left off, with Whatsername saying the iconic line, "Nobody likes you, everyone left you, they're all out without you, having fun," which in this case is a letterbomb, if you will, to Jesus of Suburbia. The track acts as Whatsername telling him he's delusional and she's leaving him, and that St.Jimmy is just a figment of his imagination. Something to note about this track is that people have critiqued it for its use of a female vocalist in the intro, but not the rest of the song. While I do think that is an interesting choice, in my opinion it seems like a bit of a nitpick. While I do agree that having different vocalists to play the characters would be cool and make the story a little more clear in places, it doesn't really ruin anything either way, since the story is still being told through the lyrics no matter what way it's being done. With that being said, I do think it would be cool if Green Day redid this song with a female vocalist, because they had, obviously, since it was a musical, a female do the Broadway version, and it sounds awesome. Regardless, this is another high-energy track which I think works perfectly for its placement in the album. It shows What's-Her-Name's frustration with Jesus of Suburbia, and it almost acts like a track filled with rage and love, if you will. It's easily one of my favorite songs on the album, and one of my favorite Green Day songs, period. And up next, probably comes one of the most introspective songs Green Day's ever written. The next track is Wake Me Up When September Ends, and this is one of the most heart-wrenching songs that I know. This is the only track on the album that directly doesn't have anything to do with the story it tells, although you could interpret it as Jesus of Suburbia becoming depressed and reflecting on his past, which in some respects the Broadway version kind of did, but that was with a bunch of different characters. The Broadway version makes this story a lot more confusing, but regardless, this song is about Billie Joe Armstrong's dad, who passed away when he was a kid. His dad was the reason he got into music and started playing guitar, so his death really hit him hard. I remember in high school, there was this series on YouTube that did a retrospective on Green Day's catalog, and from that I learned the title of the track came from Billie Joe's response to people who checked on him after his dad passed away. Supposedly, he came home crying from his dad's funeral, and this track shows how much it affected him. It's a really beautiful song that hits me in the feels every time that I hear it. And up next comes my favorite of the two 5-part tracks. The next track on the album is Homecoming, and I love this song so much. I love all 5 parts, just, man, it's so great. I also think that this track tells the most story. Part 1 of the track is the death of St.Jimmy, which shows the St.Jimmy persona becoming played out, and as everyone's turned against him in Jesus of Suburbia decides to kill him off, as it's time for him to move on. Then in part 2, it shows after all these years of Jesus of Suburbia wanting to become someone, he ends up becoming no one. He's just another office worker just doing his job. But through this, he is driven to insanity, which I think is further emphasized in part 3, Nobody Likes You, which first and foremost has a nice callback to one of the previous tracks, and it's the thought that keeps running through Jesus of Suburbia's head. What's also cool about this track is that all 3 members of Green Day sing on it, and in this part of the song, bassist Mike Dirnt does lead vocals. He's also done lead vocals on a track that's on their next album, Mass Hysteria, and I don't know how to describe it, but I just really love his voice, and I wish he did lead vocals on more of their songs. Although I do think it is interesting that Mike sings here, this part of the song is still from the perspective of Jesus of Suburbia, and Billy sings it through most of the album, which is a little surprising since, again, you could interpret this as like another person saying this to him, but you could also emphasize it as like his self-conscious, so I wouldn't say it was an unnecessary touch, but it is an interesting choice to say the least. Regardless, the next part of the track is Rock and Roll Girlfriend, and while for me, it's hard to pick which part of the song is my favorite, I'd have to say this one is. It's the most energetic of the 5 parts. Drummer Trey Cool does the lead vocals for this part of the song, and this is the 3rd time, up to this point anyways, that he did lead vocals on a song, which is a little funny since on the other 2, they were both very silly, like goofy, and in a lot of respects, joke songs. Regardless, this part of the song acts as a letter that Jesus of Suburbia gets from someone who he knew during his time in Jingletown, who was living the rock and roll life that he wanted to live, which is continuing to drive Jesus of Suburbia insane as someone he knows is literally living out his dream. And now, the last part of the song is We're Coming Home, which is sort of this ending arc for Jesus of Suburbia, realizing that his life is what you make it, so he decides to go back to his hometown. It's a nice conclusion to the track, and in a way, it feels like a good conclusion to Jesus of Suburbia's arc. And I like that the end of the song has the "nobody likes you" line at the end, which is a line from Whatsername, which transitions into the final song of the album. The final track of the album is Whatsername, and it's another personal fave. And while for me, since this is like my favorite album ever, it is very difficult to rank these songs, I would have to say this is easily one of the top 5 of this album. This track is about how Jesus of Suburbia is wondering what Whatsername is doing, and in a lot of ways, how much he misses her and regrets their breakup, but doesn't fully remember her, hence the Whatsername name. I think it truly captures that feeling of missing someone and the good times you had after a long period of time. And I remember the first time I listened to it in full, I was a little surprised that this was the closing track, but I think thematically it makes the most sense. It's sort of a bittersweet ending. Jesus of Suburbia does miss his old life and the people he met, but at least from the context of the last 2 tracks, he's grown up and he's realized that the life he dreamed of wasn't all that it was cracked out to be. But it built character for him as he finally lets out his rage and love. While it isn't the exact last bang or hoorah I would have expected the album to go out on, I like that it ends this way to show that, yeah, maybe being normal isn't that bad. Either way, it's a fantastic track and I think a great conclusion to this phenomenal album. Well, in conclusion, that was my favorite album, Green Day's American Idiot, and it will always have a special place in my heart. Through its themes and its story, it's an album that means so much to me and still packs a punch even today. And in a lot of ways, I don't really know where I'd be, especially musically, without it. It was my gateway to punk, to emo, and to alternative rock. It made me start to question a lot of the things I had heard and a lot of the things I was taught growing up, and it taught me to use my voice and the power of music to stick it to the man and fight for what's right. And above all else, bands like Green Day inspired me to make music and want to play guitar. Because of this album for me gets a 9.5 out of 10. It's a fantastic album, and in my opinion, it is Green Day's best work. I would genuinely be shocked if anything ever topped this. And if you've never listened to this album, or you don't like Green Day, please give this album a listen. Well, that wraps up the final episode of For the Record, at least for now. I just want to thank Brian Marins and KXMS and Missouri Southern's comm department for letting me doing this show. It's been such a blast, and for my viewers on YouTube, thank you all for watching, or listening in this case. I hope in some way I can continue this show, but for the time being, thank you all, and I hope you have a good night.